Universal Horror, also referred to as Universal Monsters, is the name given to films made by Universal Studios spanning from the early 1920s to the 1960s. During this time period, Universal made and produced over 100 horror movies and pioneered the American horror genre. Until the Universal horror movement, the horror genre was large in part dominated by German Expressionism, like the famous F.W. Murnau film Nosferatu, or the 1920 Robert Wiene classic The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. However, it's impossible to tell the story of American horror films without mentioning the name Carl Laemmle. Carl Laemmle was a Jewish man born in Württemberg, Germany. Following his mother's death in 1883, Carl immigrated to the United States and opened up one of the first Nickelodeons in Chicago called The White Front on Milwaukee Avenue. Unhappy with the monopoly that Thomas Edison held on the movie picture industry at the time, Laemmle started to buy up land in the San Fernando Valley to create the world's largest production facility, affectionately coined at the time Universal City, or as we know it today, Universal Studios Hollywood. Laemmle was much less focused on creating big-budget Hollywood films and buying up Nickelodeons like the other Hollywood film giants. Instead, he focused on investing in the construction of a studio factory system, which allowed him to quickly produce safe, low-budget feature films. This focus on lower-budget films categorized Universal as a minor studio, unlike the majors like MGM and Warner. This made the horror genre one of the most appealing and lucrative genres for the Universal Studios. Laemmle's first big success in the movie industry was a 1923 historical drama, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Part of the success was fueled by the lavish production set that recreated the streets of 15th century Paris, as well as the breakout performance delivered by the lead, Lon Chaney. Following the success of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Laemmle decided to bring back Lon Chaney in 1925 for an adaptation of the Gaston Leroux novel, The Phantom of the Opera. Much like the opulent set created for The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Laemmle once again spared no expense on set design. Laemmle built a one-to-one replica of the famous French opera house, the Opéra Garnier. The set was officially disassembled and put into storage in 2014, but stood as the longest-standing film set in history. In 1929, Carl Laemmle officially handed over control of the studio to his son as a gift for his 21st birthday. After Laemmle Jr.'s initial flop, The Jazz Singer, in 1929, Laemmle Jr. produced the first Universal Studios Oscar-winning film, All Quiet on the Western Front. Immediately following his success from All Quiet on the Western Front, Laemmle Jr. produced one of the most important horror movies in American cinema, Dracula. The Bram Stoker novel had already been adapted to the screen in 1922 by German expressionist F.W. Murnau in his film Nosferatu. However, Murnau hadn't paid the Stoker estate for the rights. Eventually, Bram Stoker's widowed wife sued Murnau for plagiarism, won, and subsequently had all prints of the Nosferatu film ordered to be destroyed. During the Murnau ordeal, a stage adaptation of Dracula was having an extremely successful run on Broadway. Laemmle Jr. saw this as an opportunity and bought the rights to all of the Dracula novels and screenplays for $40,000, giving Universal Studios the exclusive rights to the Dracula character. Initially, Laemmle wanted to cast Lon Chaney to play Dracula, but unfortunately, Lon Chaney contracted throat cancer and passed away in 1930. Eventually, Hungarian star Bela Lugosi was cast for the role. Though considered a mediocre Universal horror by modern critics, Dracula was opened to an overwhelming box office success. As a result of this success, Laemmle Jr. immediately shifted focus to producing more horror movies. This time, Laemmle Jr. decided to focus his attention on adapting another literary horror classic, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Laemmle Jr. had expected Lugosi to play the monster, but he refused to play the monster as he didn't want to be typecast for the rest of his career. Lugosi is famously quoted as saying, "I was a star in my country, and I will not be a scarecrow over here." While looking for a replacement, Laemmle Jr. eventually stumbled upon a man who would become a horror movie icon, Boris Karloff. Once again, Frankenstein opened to overwhelming success and grossed over $50,000 in its opening week. Universal followed this success by continuing to focus on horror movies throughout the 30s, such as Murders in the Rue Morgue, an adaptation based on an Edgar Allan Poe story, The Mummy, Werewolf of London, and the wildly successful Invisible Man. Chasing the success of the 1930s, Universal Studios turned to a new marketing strategy. Following the success of The Bride of Frankenstein in 1935 and Dracula's Daughter in 1936, had taught them that instead of focusing their attention on making new adaptations, turning to sequels and readaptations of their existing horror movies proved to be much more lucrative. The 1940s marked a new age of cinema and marketing, the age of the franchise. Throughout the 1940s, Universal produced The Invisible Man Returns, The Son of Dracula, The Ghost of Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, and many other adaptations of their Universal monsters. The 1950s marked the end of the Universal monster era, but left us with one last monster, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. The Creature from the Black Lagoon was released in 1954. It was a black and white film shot in 3D and projected in theaters by a method known as the polarized light method. The Creature from the Black Lagoon stands as one of the most iconic figures in American horror cinema history. After the 1950s, Universal Studios started to move away from the horror movie model. In the early 2000s, Universal tried to revive the Universal monster. This was following the success of The Mummy and Van Helsing, but eventually numbers on these films started to decline. Though the era of the Universal monster is over, its legacy lives on in American cinema. The Universal Monster franchise paved the way for franchise horror monsters like Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and even Chucky. Even though the Universal Monster era has ended, it will always be a part of American cinema history and continues to influence and shape American horror cinema today.